Everyone, in this video we're going to learn how to create a translation app on Thunkable app builder, and this is the application right here. So it goes off with get started button, takes you to a page where you can translate text. Let's say for example welcome, translate, and it translates into a certain language. Now if I have two buttons at the top and I can select a certain language here, these languages are customizable depending on what languages you want to add. You can add as many as you want. Let's say I'm switching this to Arabic, brings me back to the same page. Let's translate banana, and it translates that into the language. And there's also a history button, so when we click on that we can go back and check all of the different items that we've already translated. Pressing back brings it back to the translate page where we can translate additional words or text messages. So let's get started. To start the app building process of the translator, we'd navigate to the create new project, make sure you've logged in, and then we'll call this translation app. Create, and that will take us directly into the builders page. Let's just refresh here. Yeah, so we have all of the components and assets on this side, and then we have the features and settings of a certain object once you've added it in. Starting with the screen 1, so we would like to rename this, as we're going to have multiple screens just for ease of coding later on. So this is screen home or home screen. Yeah, now that we've renamed it, we can navigate on the other side here to assets, and I am going to upload images that I'm going to use. I'm going to use these two images, and I'll upload them there. And the first thing we want to do usually is do the designing. So I'll go back to the design, and for this one, since I've already uploaded the images, I can change the background now. So the background of this, I can choose a fill color if I'd like to, or in this case I'm going to use an image, and it's one of the images that I've already uploaded. Nope, not this one. Yes, so this is the image that I'd like to have on the first page, which is the home screen, and I also need a button. So I'm just going to drag and drop my button. And now this button is the get started button. So right on the side there, I can change or rename the button name also for coding purposes, and I'll call this start button. As you notice, I've changed the start button, but this one has not changed. This is only for coding purposes. For when I move into the block section, I know which button I'm dealing with. But for the design purposes, this button, to rename it, we go into this text box right here, and I'm going to call this get started. And now it's changed over here as well. Now we can change the aesthetic of this text box, so we might want to change that to bold or italic. It's completely up to you. You might want to increase or enlarge the text in that box, or disable it if you want something. But for me, I just want to change the color a bit into something that would match my aesthetic. So I'm happy with that. I've got my home screen ready. If I move into the blocks section, so just to make sure this button is functioning, so if I go to the blocks section, I can see I have the components here. So start button, that's what I want to code, and I've got a set of different blocks that I can use to code it. But what I want is the first one, which is when the start button is clicked. So I drag that in, and what I want to do is for when I click this start button or get started button, I should be taken into a different page. And so I'm going to add a new page here, and I'm going to rename that page into the translate page or the translate screen. Yeah, so this is the second page that I want, and again I'm going to change the background of this into something else. So I'm navigating to the image section instead of using a fill color, and then I'm just going to add that background image. I can also so I've got the background image, and I can navigate back now to the block section of the home screen. So when the start button is clicked, I'm supposed to navigate to the translate screen. And so in here, if I go into the control section, there's again so many different blocks for controlling the application, but what I'm interested in is the navigate to, and I'm going to add it into that section there. Now if I just zoom into this, you notice that there's like an arrow there where you can change where the button navigates to. So if I click on that drop down menu, I can see that I have two screens, which are the two screens I've created. Had I created more options, then I would get more options here as well. So for this case, translate screen, this is where I want to go. So if I just try to test that and click on the web viewer, yeah, I've got my application here. If I click get started, I am being moved into the translate screen. Great, so it's working. Now back to editing, just click on back to editing, and now I am in the second page. So I'm done with the first page and I need to work on the second page. Now if you've noticed in our initial video, we've shared that we're going to have certain buttons up here. We need a label that says which page we're on. We need a text box to show the output of our translation, and so many different features as well. So I'm going to start building the design or the interface of our application on the second page. So for this, I'm going to leave the top buttons for later. I'm only going to start with a label. So I'll add that there. And this is the title label. And I am going to call this translate. So to translate whatever text I want, I can change. This tells me that I'm on the page where I can translate. I can change the font, change the setting of my text, increase or resize the text as well. Actually, I'm going to drop that a bit lower. Yeah, so that's my button, my label right there. I also need an additional label to show in order to show the output of my translation process. I'm just going to drag that down a bit lower, and I am going to give it a background color, say and then I'm going to make that a bit of a transparent box so I can see through the background. Yeah, so that's my output box, and I am going to rename this. So this is label output, and since this is going to display the text I'm going to translate, then I don't need to have anything written in there. So I'm just going to keep that empty. You can of course change the font. This will change the font of the text that's going to show later on after you translate. So I'm going to keep a consistent font of Merriweather throughout. And in order for the user to add in the text it wants to translate, we need a text input. So I'm going to drag and drop that text input in here and resize it just like that. Again, we can also adjust, before we adjust anything, let's just make sure this says text input. And here we're going to say type text to be translated. So the user will have to type in the text he wants to translate. Do I need to change anything else? Input color, so that's the text color. Background color, I am also going to use the same. Yeah, and then pull that a bit further. And change that as well. There you go. So I've got my text input here, and I've got the text, the label that's going to display the output, and I also need a submit button or a translate button. So to add in the button, again, I'm going to drag and drop my button, and then I'm going to rename it into button translate, and then translate. As of the color, we'll go for the same as we've selected earlier, so the same shade of color. Yeah, so we have our text box. I think I'm going to reduce the transparency of this box. Feels very transparent. Or maybe change the color a bit. Yeah. And I'm just going to resize it a bit as well. Okay, happy now. Okay, now once the design is completed, we can go now to the block section. In the block section, again, we will need to go into the button translate. So when button translate is clicked, what needs to happen is, once I type in a text here, I click translate, that text here should be translated and displayed up here. So I go back to the block section. What I want is, when button translate is clicked, I want the label output to be set to a certain text. So set label outputs text, I'm going to drag and put that here, to a certain thing. Now if I go back to the design tab, this is the label output, and as of now there's nothing written there. So what I want to do is set that output text, which is nothing right now, set it to something, and that something is going to be the input text. Text inputs text. Yeah, but right now if I try to test it out, so if I type in hello and I click translate, then what's being displayed here is exactly what I've just entered, but that's not what we're looking for. So back to editing. What I want is for that text that I've entered to be translated first. So if I go down on this side, there's a tab that says speech, and what we want, or what we're looking for, is a translation of something from a certain language to another. So we drag that in, and what we want is the translation of the text input. So we want to translate the text input and then set that there. So set the label outputs text into the translation of the input from a certain language to another language. Now, the last thing we want to do is make sure that whatever we're writing here So let's say hello. Once I click on this translate, this text box here, the input text box should be empty once I click on translate in order for the user to type in an additional message. And to do that, we go on to the text input setting, and then we look for set text inputs text to nothing. So this will reset our application back to the default. So it will reset that text box into nothing. To test this out on our, what do you call it? Live test on device. You can click get started, takes me to the translate page, and then I can type in welcome, translate, and it translate. I'm going to write hello, translate, and it translate. Going to write thank you, translate, and it translates. Now, as you notice, every time I click the translate button, that message is being sent over to translate, and the translation shows in the output box here, whereas the input text box is empty or cleared out, which means our application is working just fine. In the next video, we're going to look at how to design the languages page in order for the user to choose which language he wants, and how to design the history page to display all of the different words or sentences that have already been translated, and also adding these two buttons on the translate page in order to navigate to these two other pages. And we're going to work on the components on the side as well as the block section. Stay tuned. See you on the next one.